Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now it's the 30th of March, we're in Brisbane, and it is very clearly raining. This is the remains of ex-tropical cyclone Debbie, which has been dumping a lovely lot of rain, big old east coast low I suppose you'd say, on Brisbane today. We are going to go out in this episode, we're going to look at a bunch of sites, some of which we've seen before, and for those ones I will throw the previous episode numbers up on the screen so that you can flick back to those and kind of see them during big storm events and previously not in a big storm event. To give you some context, it started raining about 1 AM this morning. It's currently about 2 PM this afternoon, so that's 13 hours. In the western suburbs, we've had about, we're in the western suburbs, we've had about 200 mils of rain in 13 hours. So let's go take a look at that. This first site is at Indooroopilly. It's a trash rack on a drain slash what was once a creek back in the day. Let's go take a look. The funny thing about visiting this site, and I'd never been here before, was that there was so much water that we couldn't really tell what we were looking at. So I went back the next day and had a look with less water. Two things really caught my attention. One was how little debris there was actually caught in this system, and two was how much coarse sediment had been captured, presumably eroded from further upstream. I don't think this was carried in off the catchment, but how much coarse sediment was captured in the access ramp to this particular system, and it had settled out where there wasn't as much velocity, and then subsequently towards the end of the event there was this little bit of erosion running down the path itself. After the trash rack, it was on to Oxley Creek Common. Now, it's a parkland right down on the banks of Oxley Creek. I wasn't alone on this trip. Nilu, Russell, thank you for coming along, thank you for sharing this experience, this learning with me, but this is what we were confronted with. After a few moments of pondering the wisdom or otherwise of whether to wade out to the pontoon, Nilu spotted something. We carefully made our way out onto the pontoon, and the creek was certainly up. Then it was on to our third site. This site we'd been to before. This is one of Brisbane City Council's creek filtration systems. It's, depending on which way you look at it, either a level spreader with a big wide vegetated swale after it, or it's a pipeless bioretention system. Anyway, we've been to it before, episode 77 if you want to take a look at it in the past. The water was certainly up here, a mixture of backwater coming up from Oxley Creek and some local catchment inflows coming in. As with the first site, things are a little bit hard to see when they're underwater, so here's a couple of old photos. The first one comes from 2 years ago. The system's establishing really nicely. The second photo is from December 2016. That's about 5 months ago. And the system's still nicely established, but the weeds are getting in and really getting established. Shot number 3 is from really recently, about a month or so ago, post some weed management. And in fact, that shot and others like it are the subject of an upcoming Ideanthro video. This site really caught my attention because it's not often you get to see how a bioretention system of sorts responds to what is essentially creek or riverine flooding backwatering up into it with lots of silt and lots of clay in it. So I went back the next morning thinking, I'm going to set up my GoPro, I'm going to film a time lapse, see how the water behaves around this system, because the water's going to be up for a while, and let's have a look at what happens, and I'll go back when the water does finally recede and check the system out. Here's the thing though, I didn't expect the water to stay up just quite this long. It stayed up all day on the second day, all day on the Friday, and then receded overnight. So I then came back on the Saturday, moved the camera a little bit closer, and caught a bit more footage of that water backing out of the system. What I really wanted to know was how much silt had been deposited in the system, and was it going to cause an issue? Was it going to clog it up? Was it going to cause problems? So I came back, this is now on the Sunday. The original rain was on Thursday. This is like 3 days later. I came back, I found the dry patch, and I decided to dig a hole to have a look. And here's the thing, the soil was completely saturated. Honestly, I couldn't actually tell what was silt on top and what was the in-situ soil. I'm gonna have to come back at some point in the future and have a dig around when it's a lot drier, and I'll make a video about that. But what I did find really interesting was just how saturated the soil was. Check out this footage as I get a really big stick and literally force, even without digging into the system, force that down into the media. Look how deep I was able to get that in. So I was like, look at that. Look how much water has actually managed to soak into this system. Now in a big flood like this, that's just gonna be a blip on the radar. But I was like, this does suggest, at least, that this system in a smaller, maybe more localized rainfall event could actually be soaking up quite a lot of water. It'd be really interesting, here's another investigation for me to do, to come back and do some infiltration testing on this system. So keep an eye out for that in the future. As a final thought though, what I did want to do here was I was like, okay, well, let's just check that this really soft, soggy soil, this super saturated soil just hasn't happened everywhere around here. It's all been inundated. Is it unique to the treatment system here? Or is all the soil around here really boggy? So I got my stick, I wandered just around the corner. Oh, a little safety note here about this system. If you do ever decide to visit it, if you happen to know where it is, just be aware, right next door, there is a sewer overflow point. Now, floodwater isn't the most hygienic thing at the best of times, but this particular site, there's probably been raw sewage popping out sometime over the past few days. So, you know, make your own decisions about what's sensible here. Don't necessarily copy what I just do. But anyway, I decided to wander over nearby to where there was a little bit of kind of standing water still there and see if I could force the stick in. And guess what? I couldn't. It was really compacted, the actual in-situ soil that was there. So, maybe there's something just minor, just first up, just original that we can take from this. On to site 4. Things were getting pretty cold by this stage. My phone was starting to fog up. It had so much water getting into it. But this little bioretention system is actually down the back of my home. It has 2 entrances to it. It's embedded, well, 2 entrances with 2 bioretention systems embedded within a bigger flood detention system. One of the bioretention systems had a fully stabilised upstream catchment, and the water flowing in was relatively clear. The other, however, had a development site upstream, and you can see the turbidity, see the murkiness of the water flowing into this half of the bioretention. In fact, if you look closely at this outlet pit, you can actually see the turbid water from one side and the clear water from the other. Where things got really interesting with this site was the next day, when I came back and looked at what had happened to those 2 separate bioretention systems, one with relatively clear water coming in, one with really turbid water coming in, and compared what had happened in the system. Now the reason that this is interesting was that in Ideanthro episode 97, I had a little bit of a rant at this system about the, well, in my opinion, the lack of use of coarse sediment forebays in bioretention systems, and why I really don't see much purpose for them. And looking the day after at these 2 otherwise very similar bioretention systems, but one of them had turbid water coming in, the other one clear, and looking what had resulted was absolutely fascinating. So for the first one, where there was relatively clear water coming into the system, yeah, a little bit of coarse sediment had been dropped out in the forebay, but really not that much. And then very little sediment had made its way through, and what water was left sitting in the bioretention system was reasonably clear. Flip around to the other end though, and the story was very different. Again, a relatively similar amount of coarse sediment had been dropped out in this system, but heaps of finer, siltier stuff had made its way through the coarse sediment forebay and smothered out across the system. The water that was still sitting there was really turbid. And if you want to know the significance of that, and want to know why, for me, that just indicates why I don't see the purpose of coarse sediment forebays in bioretention systems, check out episode 97. Next, site number 5, a streetscape bioretention system that we visited in episode 5. We're all the way back there. Now, for all the beauty of this system, there's always been one thing that bugged me about it, and that was the fact that if you look at the road, the grading of it, the way the sediment and the rocks are built up in the bioretention system, in the dry, because I've never seen this site in the wet before, in the dry, it just didn't look like any water was going to get in. When we first got to the site, it looked like this was the case. There was water flowing down the edge, it didn't look like much was getting into the system. But when we looked a little bit closer, we found a few spots that it was getting in. We also found some leaf litter and debris that had been pushed by water coming down the bioretention system. And ultimately, we found some water coming out of the under drains. And okay, while it doesn't suggest that this system is working perfectly, it was heartening to see that after all this time, because it's 15 years old, this system is still doing something. Finally, Site 6, for some streetscape bioretention systems that we also visited in episode 5. I'd never seen these systems in the wet before, so at first up, it was just pleasing to see water getting in, and it was pleasing to see some debris and leaf litter up high in the plants to show there'd actually been lots of water in the system. Where things got really interesting were the bioretention tree pits further up in the system. Now we noticed that while some water was getting in, a fair bit was bypassing. And it made for a really good example, as Nilo is demonstrating here, of just how if the outlet pits were slightly differently designed, we could get so much more water into these systems. And that's it. That's the last site. Thank you for tuning in. But before you go, I'd like to address something. For a stormwater professional, a water management professional like me, this sort of flooding is a really good opportunity to get out and learn about the world, because that's how we improve our practice and improve what we do for our society and our cities. But I recognise that for a very, 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 very large number of people, flooding like this is not an opportunity, but a really challenging time, a really terrible time, in fact. And I just want to conclude this video by saying that we're thinking of you, and that I hope that as soon as possible, you get back on your feet to the best of your ability. And that's it. We'll see you next time.